Hello, friends. It's Shanika from Get Checkered, and I wanted to jump in before this episode got started. I recorded this about a week ago, if not a little bit longer, and that was at a point where there was a lot of the world just looked like a different place. So I thought it would be important to just talk about world news, but then also talk about how it impacts the sport before we dive into this episode, and you get to listen to my interview with Amelia. The big thing that's happening is Russia has invaded Ukraine, and I'm sure many of you, like me, feel extremely helpless. And I, like you, have no idea what this means and what this could be for the future. In terms of Formula One, unsurprisingly, Haas has dropped the one who shall not be named. His dad, the primary sponsor of Haas, because of his close ties to Vladimir Putin, and of course being a Russian oligarch and a Russian billionaire himself. And Formula One has chosen to not race in Russia this year. So as more updates come, we'll be sure to share them. But until then, I hope you enjoy this episode. Hey everyone, it's Shanika with Get Checkered, which is part of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown and community supported. The girls are away, as we discussed, I think sometime last week. So Caitlin is in Palm Springs. Courtney's living her best life, doing school. Lizzie's a bee. So I have someone else joining me today, and I'm very excited. Her name is Amelia. Do you want to say hello?
Hello. I was letting you do your thing.
And I, for anyone that's on like F1 Twitter, you definitely know who this person is, but her article called Megan the Stallion Can Do Whatever She Wants, actually, for F1 Chronicle, was what really caught my attention. And then after that, I started following her, and I was just like, this girl is just so much braver than I am and is saying all the things that I wish I could say. And her approach to everything is so nuanced. So I have been waiting like 3 months to reach out, mostly because she's like, I would say you're Twitter famous a little bit. So I was just like, what if I pitch her and then she just doesn't see it? And then I always say, like, what's the worst that happens is that person says no. But I don't know. I was a little nervous. I'll say it. Also, what made me nervous is Amelia is so freaking brilliant and is 10 years younger than me. Okay. 10
Can
years.
I say it? I'm 11 years younger than you.
11 years younger than me. Oh my gosh. And yeah, so I think this just proves you can be a little nervous about anything at any age, but it's just really cool to see how you've built everything that you've built. So I'm just so excited to have you on. And today we're going to be talking about basically everything wrong with Formula One. For any of yeah. Seriously, anyone that listens, that we've been very, we're new fans to the sport, and we've been very critical about a lot of things. Caitlin more so with her, her being in the middle of her master's about I don't know what she's taking. It's like something about environmental engineering. And so she's been very critical about F1's environmental impact. Obviously, given my background, we've been talking a lot about gender and just morality tied to F1 and the FIA, and if that exists. Amelia is probably going to say it doesn't. And then also, like, what does accountability look like for fans of the sport? Because the sport is growing very quickly, especially in the North American market. It's just rapid. Everywhere I go, there is merch for some team in stores that never had it before. So I worry that a lot of these issues are just going to be brushed under the rug. But I just wanted to throw it to you, Amelia, so you can introduce yourself, even though I think I did an okay job.
Okay, so I feel like you've said quite a bit, but I'm Amelia. I'll call myself a writer. I'm an F1 writer. Like you said, focus mainly on social issues, kind of politics linked to the sport, because that's what I really care about. I'm trying on social media, especially on Twitter, to just try and discuss those issues more and make change. Yeah. So that's what I do.
She's 11 years younger than me, people. And I just, I like, shit you not, I'm just so impressed with you. And I'm not just saying that because you're on my
Thank
podcast.
you.
So we're gonna dive, like I had, as you all know, we put everything in Notion, but I have a few topics, but the thing is, I feel like Amelia and I are gonna be able to talk about a ton of things. So we're kind of just see where the conversation takes us. Don't worry, at the very, very end of the episode or near the end, I want to make sure we ask like the questions that we ask most of the people we interview, which is stuff related to drivers. I'll make sure to do that. But I just want this to be a free flowing conversation because I I don't know. We always see the issues, and it's always been really concerning that it seems like, aside from you, people just aren't that vocal. So I don't know what topic you want to start with, Amelia, but we can talk about gender if you'd like.
That's a good start. I feel like that's a very good start.
Yeah. So thoughts?
um, so I was like, this is going to be a bit off topic to start, but I'm in like this mentoring program that's for feminist leadership at the moment.
Yeah.
And I was creating one of the tasks we had this week was to create a zine about like any issue created to gender.
Yeah.
And I chose to talk about basically women in motorsport because that's my thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing that, I mean, it's always obvious, but I feel like it just kind of, I had a realization, a mini epiphany as I was writing, was like,
Yeah.
women aren't stopped by motorsport itself. The only reason women are suppressed in motorsport, the reason we're marginalized, is just because of prejudice and discrimination and misogyny. We constantly, like, I spend so much of my time talking about how women like are so marginalized in motorsport, and the only reason that's the case is because of misogyny. That's the only reason. And that's, I think, what infuriates me the most is we have such, I'm looking at what you put on the notion here, we have such little history. I mean, we do, but in terms of like at the very top levels of most sport, there's really not that many of us. And all of that is because of misogyny. That's it.
It's, yeah, you kind of nailed it. It's been really eye-opening because when I was looking up the topic and trying to pull up articles, just not even today, but over the last couple months that we've been doing the podcast, something that resonated again in these articles, and which I'm glad, Amelia, that you're a writer because we need more out there when you're reading this shit and all they're saying is, well, like women are just not interested in the sport. I'm like, that's not it. So why are you even putting that out there in an article to the world saying that like women aren't interested
Exactly.
in the sport, or it becomes a conversation of, well, they're not being encouraged to go into the sport, which I think is like a fair assessment. Um, but to say that they're not interested is something that I just still can't wrap my head around, because you're proof that it exists in this space. I'm proof of that. Like the reason why we started this podcast actually is we were looking at the landscape of media here, especially North America, and it was just a bunch of dudes talking
That's
about the
all it is.
sport. And I was like, this is not how it should be. And then when you dive deeper into Formula One itself, you see that it's kind of this thread, right? That's there
Mm-hmm.
all the way from, the beginning stages of the drivers, but into the actual organization itself, the FIA and Formula One, to the teams, and then on from there. It's just
Yeah.
really disappointing. And I pulled up an article from ESPN again, which I thought was like, oh wow, Formula One is growing. Look at this. But so they reached out to the teams and asked about just how many of your employees are female, which I'm going to bring up something else after this about how we talk about gender in these
Yes.
surveys, because I think that's a big issue. And Mercedes is the one that gave the most amount of information. But what I thought was more interesting was the amount of teams that didn't give any information.
Yes, I remember that.
So for those who don't know, Mercedes handed over some information. It looks like about 31% of women are in senior roles. And with Haas, they have, it's fine. Okay, mind you, Haas is obviously a smaller team, but that's not a good reason. 9% are women, And McLaren, they have 66 people who regularly travel with the team, and 5 are women, with only 1 in a senior role. And with Alfa Romeo, there's 51 people that regularly travel with the team, and of them, 5 are women, so about 9.8%. And then Red Bull, Ferrari, Williams didn't respond to the survey. Aston Martin and Alpine said that they didn't have the requested information available. They weren't able to provide it. And then AlphaTauri said that, well, they have women in senior roles, they just don't have any in the factory. What the hell?
It's laughable.
It is so laughable. Like, you're right, 100%.
Yeah.
And
But you're reading those stats and I'm giggling because it's that outrageous.
and I what I find is so surprising, because we always joke on the podcast that it seems like none of these teams have PR people who are like, hey, maybe don't do that. Maybe don't say that. And for Alpine and Aston Martin to be like, oh, we are unable to provide this information, that just seems so ridiculous to me.
I think their defense at the time was like, I think so. I remember someone saying that the teams that didn't respond, some of them had rotating teams, like they had rotating personnel. But then it's like, surely you'd be able to say, oh, well, we have this amount of people that we rotate and these people are regularly in the roles.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's pretty obvious what's going on.
It is. And of course, when we talk about gender, we're talking about it in a very binary sense, which I don't think is fair either. Because if we want these teams to represent what society looks like, we know there are so many ways people identify themselves, right? So we want to have space for that too. But what worries me is that if women aren't even being represented, or even their information isn't being shared, sorry, Aston Martin, Alpine, for those that are more oppressed, which is someone who would be non-binary, how do you fit into this picture at all?
You don't. That's the truth. You aren't perceived, because I think the one thing I have learned in my almost 2 years now is that never ever be amazed by how terrible this sport can be and how misogynist sport can be. And I think those stats are just so representative of that, because it's like we were saying, it's laughable, but that's like most of these teams are UK based. That is, I'm going to make a wild guess here, but I'm guessing those stats are far worse than most companies in the UK.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's incredible how few women there are. Like, even you could say now, I would argue Mercedes are making an active effort to improve this, and that's all they can muster up. It's what, 30% in senior roles? That's all they can manage.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
It is. And I think it's interesting that you touch on just what's happening in the UK, because for someone that's from Canada, ever since, I know people, I'm sorry, everyone's gonna have their opinion on our prime minister, I get it, but one of the things that he did when he first went into office was to really address gender parity, and to really bring that to the forefront of a lot of conversations, was to just talk about gender more so than any other leader had. And I think it has shifted some narrative in the country. And it's interesting that you say that in the UK at traditional companies, that what your guess is that
it's a wild guess, but like, I think like this is I don't think you can make a massive generalization, but I don't think, like, I've never experienced or seen the misogyny I have since I entered the Formula One space.
Really?
Yeah. And like, now I would say, because I basically moved schools when I was 16.
Yeah.
And my school now is like, I've seen more sexism within it, because it's a school for 16 to 18-year-olds, but I've still never seen anything on this scale.
That it is in motorsport. Love to see it. Love to see that. So the question that I have, and something that I kind of feel at a loss for, is how the hell do we create change, but also when it's not being acknowledged by the people that have the most power?
I think people like Seb and Lewis, and let's take the Mercedes deal with the company that was involved in Grenfell. I think things like that prove that no matter what we want as fans of the sport, we are constantly fighting against profit, against owners who want profit. And I feel like that's the problem with misogyny, because we can raise attentions to it and they will make small changes, but I don't think the numbers that you listed are ever going to change unless we do something like really serious, unless the conversation shifts massively. And I think that's going to be a really difficult fight.
And I think that's just something that really bothers me, because when it comes to, so on our podcast, as you all know, we have never ever said or even talked about Mazepin. And it's just because I just felt like we didn't have the space to dedicate as much time around the conversation and all that kind of stuff. And I know that's a privilege. And I also would like to say, like, I just found it to be very like triggering to be like, how is this man here? But I think it does touch on what you're saying, which is this was a real moment for the FIA, Formula One, for the other teams to say, these are our values. This is what we're standing by. And instead that didn't happen. Right.
Definitely. It could have been a watershed moment, and they said no because they wanted to preserve the status quo. They wanted to protect the money. They wanted to make sure that the cash that was flowing into the sport kept flowing in no matter what. Despite everything that we did, everything that we thought. And like, I watched that fight. I remember being on Twitter every day and being moved by how many people cared, by how long we stayed on the trending pages. And yet we saw nothing from anyone except a few words from the FIA, because it doesn't, when the money is threatened, nothing else matters.
Oh my God. It just makes me so angry. So it makes you question, like, how does morality fit? This is a really big question. Oh my gosh, I feel like a professor asking this and I don't have an answer. Because I feel like I did have to write something about this, like very similarly in a philosophy class I took. But how does morality even fit in a sport where money, like as you're noting, and as we've talked about on the podcast, it seems to be the main driver, right? And I don't have an answer to that. And as someone that really loves the sport and loves, the community around it, which some of the community, not all the community, we'll talk about that later. But like that really enjoys the sport. It's one of the things that I can't still like wrap my head around.
Yeah.
Because for me, it would be like a no-brainer, right? It's just, no, this man did this. If you want to create a safe space for more women to actually join the sport, not just only on the teams, but to eventually become drivers, then this person can't be there. It feels like a no-brainer to me.
That's because it is, because I think we have a different perspective. I mean, I think if you want to truly address that question, you need to look at, like, I don't know, I'll stop being an anti-capitalist. But like, I think there is a real question of like the purpose of sport for us versus the purpose of sport for the people that own the rights to it. And the fact that, I mean, for me, I see sport as something human that doesn't need to have money involved. Sport is something that fundamentally we do because we enjoy it as humans. We don't do it for money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'd probably have a lot more money if I chose not to watch F1 tomorrow ever again. But the people that are in charge of that, although some of them might really care about what happens in this sport, it's a source of financial income for them. And it is a source of profit. And for them, they don't see it as something that is, they don't see the enjoyment of it as something sacred. They just see it as money. So I think morality can fit into it for us, but I don't think they think morality should fit into it, because they don't see it as something above profit. They just see it as profit.
Which I think is probably the biggest issue about capitalism, is it not? Which is that it's tied into this very like masculine belief, misogyny, patriarchy, and all of that, which inherently continues to oppress everyone else. And in this sport, we see it kind of play out in 4K, right? Where there's just absolutely no representation. It's almost like a hyper-focused experiment of it, because there is so much money in Formula One. There's so much money in Formula One.
Everything is money. Everything.
Everything. And, for even just the casual watcher, if you're watching for the first time, you can see it right away with the cars and how much advertising's on there. And that is enough to tell you how much money there is without even really diving into the deep, sort of messy relationships and
Exactly.
drivers that are there. For those who don't know, Mazepin's dad is like a Russian billionaire. Not the only kid of a billionaire.
Not the only one.
Grid.
There's quite a few of them.
But
even that in itself is so weird. Like, tell your
yeah,
friends that don't watch F1, that don't know anything about it, that 3 of the 20 drivers on the grid are sons of billionaires. When you put it like that, that's 3 in 20. That's what? I can't do maths. That's 15%.
that's insane.
That's an outrageous number.
It's an insane number. And you know what's so funny? When you said that, I was like, who's the third? And I am not going to apologize to Nicholas Latifi, but I forget you all the time. And I'm sorry, sir. Truly, because he's also Canadian. And I'm like, I forget him all the time.
There you go. According to Canadian Business, in November 2017, there were at least 100 Canadian billionaires using the Canadian dollar. 2 of their sons are in Formula One. That's a scary number.
That is such a scary number. I also love that Amelia knew this fact, and I'm like, lived here my entire life.
No, I've
like,
literally just gone on Wikipedia for it.
You pulled it up because I was like, I did not know that. Like, I didn't think we had many.
No, I'm not that good.
But it's just so surprising, and I think one of the things that what I'm curious to ask you as someone that's written about the sport for the last 2 years and really found your voice in this space, where do you like, we've talked about the fact that this is a sport that's driven by money as much as it's like, oh, everyone wants to have fun. No, it's money. But what changes do you think happen so that we can see more women represented in the sport? And that comes from the driver's side as well as the teams and as well as the governing body that exists.
I think, like we were saying, like you were referencing how the capitalism in the sport is inherently impressive, of women amongst others. I think part of it is just like a fundamental shift where the people leading the sport at least have some openness to changing it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I am not going to be the person that constantly sings Toto Wolff's praises, because I like the man in terms of F1 executives. I don't think he's perfect, but I think even just people like that,
Yeah,
compared to some other team bosses, just having people in the sport who are open to change. And then I think changing the structures below it, changing attitudes and also systems for things like Formula 2, Formula 3. Something else I was talking about with a friend recently is how, I probably tweeted about it, how if you go on like the F3 website now and look at the drivers, like I like Junior Series, I know most of the guys on there, some of them I don't.
yeah.
Or like some of them, their names you've heard once. How many times have you heard Jamie Chadwick's name? Why is it that every single like 16, 17-year-old boy in Formula 3 that doesn't have any major Cup Series wins can fill Formula 3 seats, yet Jamie Chadwick, who is a 2-time series winner in an F3 regional car, somehow does not deserve a place in F3, when half of the boys in it this year are using it as an entry-level feeder series? Just attitudes like that, and the way that we look at getting women into the sport, I think that's what we need to change now.
That's I didn't even think about the feeder series. That's a really good point. I truly just didn't think about it because we get so caught up, I find, in Formula One, just looking at it and be like, where are the issues? But you're right, it is a grander system. And
Yeah,
if you aren't looking at F3 or the feeder series into F3 or into F2, then it becomes a big question of, where does that change actually happen? And I'm kind of with you on just like, we need some leadership here. And I mean that on the team side, the driver side,
yeah,
like everywhere there needs to be some sort of acknowledgement that, we're not doing things right. But I think that line, that sort of grace to have, to be like, we may have gotten it wrong here, or you know what, we are doing things incorrectly, we need to approach it from a better way. To have that
Yeah.
grace is something a lot of people, let alone organizations, do not have. Um, and my hope is with the sport, growing as rapidly as it is in North America, that more people aren't just blindly watching it and absorbing it
Yeah.
and not seeing the actual structural issues. And I think a great example obviously is like the NFL, and how they've kind of had a lot of things come up in the last few years,
Yeah.
deservedly so, because fuck them. But what I mean by that, it's just I even have a hard time watching the sport now because it's a bunch of white owners that are essentially like profiting off of black players who don't end up being as successful as the white owners were able to be. And there is just like constant structural just issue there that's
Yeah.
not talked about. And I find that if there was this sort of not even big moment, though, it's the NFL, Colin Kaepernick, there's huge conversation around race, but like not much changed. And I wonder with Formula One, like, is there going to be
Yeah.
a moment where they have a version of that where, okay, sure, maybe small things change, but a ton doesn't change. However, just the conversation keeps going. Because I feel like with the NFL, the conversation now is
Yeah.
always there, right? We're always talking about race and the power dynamics that exist in the sport. And also the fact that Colin Kaepernick still it can't get on a team at all, is completely blacklisted. I wonder if there is going to be that moment in Formula One. And as we mentioned, it wasn't Mazepin. So who, like, when?
Yeah. I think, oh God, that's a big question, because what I would say is if we carry on working, this can be the moment. I don't think, I think, I think the issues are far too structural and too ingrained and too implicit in some ways, but
Yeah.
also too, like, people are too used to them for there to be one light bulb moment where everything changes in that moment. But I think there can be just a period where there is huge change, and maybe it's like recency bias because I haven't been here
Yeah.
forever. But from what I've heard from a lot of people, this could be the moment. The last season and the season before that could be a moment. I definitely think 2020 was some kind of turning point.
Yeah.
It's just whether we can cling on to that wave and that power of change. Because I think what Lewis did, especially Seb becoming more involved in that role, I think that's important, because then you have two major leaders in the sport, two major drivers who no one can ignore, who the media can't ignore,
Yeah.
becoming a force with us. Not that Lewis ever wasn't, but I think the power of them combined can be something that we can push. And I think the Mazepin situation is a force for all of us, even if it isn't happening right now. So I
Yeah.
think if we carry on pushing, this could be the moment. And this conversation and every conversation around us like this can be the moment. It's just whether we can keep pushing it.
And I think that what you're talking about is it's so true. It's the energy, right? Like, can we continue
Yeah.
to draw attention to this? And um, you know, I think that is, for myself at least, I am at a certain level of privilege, and I think that's important to do, because when you are holding that position, whether it's having, people that listen to me on a podcast or whatever that may be, it's, you need to continue the fight and to continue to call things out as it comes, because we have the power to do it. Right. And it's a lot of
Yeah.
responsibility though. Like, Amelia, I'm going to keep saying this. I'm going to sound like a broken record. She's 17, everyone. It's astounding me. Like, and I have a lot of hope for the sport because of, seeing how much you're willing to be so vocal and to, take the hits, because I could not, and correct me if I'm wrong, but for the Megan Thee Stallion article that you wrote, I just was like, this is so nuanced. This is exactly what I was thinking. And the amount of like support you got from what I saw online, I was like, oh, great. But then the amount of just like dumb people
Always, always.
Or being shitty for the sake of being shitty and not really checking their own bias or being like, hey, why do I feel this way? Like, what is this about me that I feel like triggered by this article that's, pointing out some power dynamics and also just like things that have happened in Megan Thee Stallion's life. Like I'm just floored because you do have this bravery when you talk about all of this stuff to be 17 and to put all this out there and say that you want something better from your sport. You want to hold these people accountable and to do it so publicly. I don't even know. I'm so impressed.
I feel like that's, I don't know, I don't like it philosophical, but I feel like there are things we're born to do. And I feel like even if I wasn't born to do this, like, I feel like maybe not to the extent of other people in the community, but I do feel like to a sense people see me as someone that does this,
Yeah.
whether that means they perceive me negatively or positively. I feel like this is something I have the power and the privilege and the resources to do, and I have the connections to do it now. So I feel like I'm going to do this until I can't. And I know people are going to target me for it, but I'm at the stage now where I think I could write anything. Like,
Yeah.
I could write an article explaining why 1+1 is 2, and there'd be people on Facebook saying, like, this is nonsense, she needs to shut up. So I feel like at this point, like, I may as well voice the things that a lot of people are maybe too scared to do, or maybe don't have the power or the privilege or the position to do. So
Yeah.
I'm just going to try and do it. And I'm going to do it listening to as many people as possible.
See, love that. The future has a chance, people. Millennials have given up. We have given up, but
Oh no.
there is a chance. You kind of touched on this actually, with mentioning Seb and Lewis, and I'm curious to get your thoughts around how drivers need to be activists, because you're right. Seb, Lewis, so vocal. Especially in the last year, it was really great to see Seb kind of find his voice in the matters that like resonate with him, and to sort of just draw attention to it as much as he can. But these are also two drivers who, are older and are probably not looking to exit. I would think. I would hope not.
Yeah.
But that conversation is going to come up in the next couple of years for sure. So for the new drivers, you as like a Formula One rider and a bit of an activist, what's like the piece of advice that you would give them? Because they're also very young, right?
Yeah, for me, that new generation can include like the people. I'm going to include the people in like F3, F2, and also like the George, Lando, Max, Charles generation, because I feel like those are two groups. But for me, I think it's like the one word I would use is listen. Like, take a moment to shut up and listen, because you may know so much more than anyone else about how to drive a car. You may be some of the best in the world at driving a car, but you have seen this sport from the perspective of a winner and of a white male winner. So you do not know what we have seen. The structure that has you at the top of it, you do not see every constituent part of the bottom of that. That means we cannot get up there. That means women can not get up there, and we cannot have our voices heard in the same way. So I think listen. Like, there was a clip of, I think it was Charles talking about, it was when the B series was announced, I think, to go on the same calendar as F1, and Charles said something about, he was asked about women in F1, and he said, yeah, she's got the talent. And that specific word infuriates so many people, that phrase, because it suggests that there aren't women already there. But if he shut up and listen and recognize that he didn't know everything, he would see that there are so many women that do deserve a place. So many people, people that have raced against his brother, women that have raced there, but aren't getting the role because they don't have the resources or they don't have the opportunities. So I think just for 1 second, like especially George is in, I think, the best position to do this, because he is surrounded by so many people that are at the forefront of this fight for change, and he is still maybe making mistakes, or he does still have the room to say things that aren't true. So I think if he shuts up now and listens to people that see sport from our angle, then he could lead the change in this sport for the next 20 years as a driver. And that's such an opportunity.
Yeah, it's something that Caitlin and I have talked about too, where our hope has always been that with Lewis's been, I feel like, more vocal in the last few years, always, but kind of owning it more and
Yeah,
stepping into it more. And then same with Seb,
definitely.
that I hope that these drivers are looking at the two of them and are saying,
Yeah,
okay, like that's what real legacy is, right? It, of course, people want to win and they want to win multiple
yeah.
times. We get
I
that.
think those two are good at proving that though, because they are
Yeah,
winners. No one can
exactly.
say Lewis and Seb haven't won.
Well, that's exactly it, right? Like you can win multiple times over and be the best in the entire world, but also that like true legacy comes from bringing these conversations to the forefront and really creating change for the people that are coming up behind you. Um, and really making sure that the sport evolves with the times. And I actually do agree with you. I it's been kind of surprising for me to like these men are they're so privileged, right? Um,
Yeah,
especially like the Formula One drivers, just the amount of money that they're surrounded by. And when you realize that these drivers who are like 19, 20s, stuff like that, have been like ever since they were a little baby, like pushed along the way to like become a Formula One driver. It just is a lot of privilege. And it's really surprising to me that they've kind of continued, especially the younger ones, to continue to not say anything or, like you said, just have
yeah,
missteps here and there. Like it's going to happen. And I think it's important to have grace, but it's also like there are severe issues with some of the places that, Formula One races in, right? And I don't believe that they can be that naive. You know what I mean? To
I
what's
do know what
actually
you mean.
going on.
I think a lot of them just don't see it as their duty. Maybe
Which
I
is
feel like that's a possibility.
yeah, which is so insane to me because obviously you see it as someone that's just a fan of the sport. I see it as someone that's a fan of the sport too. So what is that disconnect there? Are they that removed from reality that it just like feels like it's not their responsibility?
Maybe it's because like I don't know these men. I don't want to generalize every single one of them because they're
Yeah.
not all as privileged as each other. Like George definitely isn't as privileged as let's say Lando or Max. But if you take
Yeah.
Charles from Monaco, right? He isn't. His parents aren't billionaires, but they had money. He's always grown up around racing. Obviously, he suffered incredible loss, but he has always grown up in a world of business and money and all of these things. He's always grown up in misogynistic, racist environments,
Yeah.
environments that we know are capitalist and oppressive. So I don't think it's not necessarily that he doesn't see those things in most sports a problem. He just sees them as a natural in the world around him. If that's the world you grow up in, you don't see it as a problem
That's
with
true.
F1. You just see it as a problem with the world.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And this is something that I don't have written down, but I'm curious to get your thoughts is
Go for it.
so it makes Caitlin and I livid that Formula One chooses to race in certain countries. And I know a lot of the time it's what gets reported at least publicly, which again, media, we can talk about that later. But it's like, oh, it's they shouldn't be racing in the Middle East. And it's like, no, there are a lot of other countries, including like racing in Russia and racing in
Yeah,
some of the European countries. Like there's a lot of issues. And I would even say, like, if you're coming to race in Canada, like, you know,
yeah,
sure, good, great, but let's really talk about what does reconciliation look like and maybe draw attention to the fact that indigenous folks in our own country like don't have access to clean
yeah.
drinking water. um so there are all these issues with where they're racing, and we've talked about money being a driver, but for you personally, are there any countries that you just like physically cringe when you hear, oh, we've, extended a 5-year contract with, or anything like that?
I think the countries thing is always a difficult one because
Yeah.
I am always going to err on the side of let's race there. I think
Yeah.
I feel like it's a difficult one because I can live with racing in countries like Saudi Arabia if we don't compromise on our principles, because I think there are people in Saudi Arabia who obviously so many people are who are oppressed by the legislation in that countries. I'm not going to say one country is better than another,
Yeah.
um, but I think it's just like the um, the sponsorship deals with let's say Aramco. I feel like that hurts more because that's the money directly. I feel like if you race in Saudi Arabia, you have the opportunity to show our sport and maybe to help people and to show that, you know, this is an opportunity for you, this is what we do. Whereas if it's just an exchange of money, then that's just helping a country that oppresses others.
That's a very, like I said, nuanced or very nuanced.
I love that word.
I know. I just like, it's definitely who you are as a person. I think that's so wonderful. But yeah, and I think that's something that I struggled with too, because I think going into these countries and racing, it also draws attention to the country and the issues that exist, right? Because typically for that weekend that they're in, whatever country it may be, it isn't just like, of course, the majority of the articles are talking about the racing and all that kind of stuff, but there is coverage about just what happens in those countries. And that's something that I've struggled with too, because I'm like, oh, I see the importance of it, right? Because you also want to shed light on certain issues. Going into those countries helps do that. You also, like you said, can inspire people to say like, hey, look, this is an opportunity. You could do this, especially for the young girls out there. You could do this. But it's like such a tough thing to navigate still.
I think my take on this is that if our sport and the people leading it were better, this would not be as much of an issue. I feel like if this is going to be difficult to imagine, but imagine a world where the FIA are genuinely, at least on some fronts, fighting for liberation and equality. They are fighting for us to be represented, and change is happening because the people at the top are leading it. Even if you imagine that, like, the efforts that the Aston Martin teams, not necessarily the people at the top, the people at Mercedes and Aston Martin that are leading these efforts, imagine that's the same all across the board at F1. And we perceive ourselves as a sport that is actually taking good steps to move things forward. At the same rate that we are with things like W Series. If you then went to a country, one of those countries that has these issues that people don't like racing in, and we said, this is who we are and we are not going to change this for your money, then that country either has to give space to what we're doing, which is an active effort against those, like that misogyny, that homophobia in those countries, or they have to shut it out. So I feel like if we were better as a sport, then we would have a solution to this problem. Because they would either have to give space to us or say no to us.
And I think it comes back to that sort of like value driven work, right? Like if the sport is truly values driven, and then a lot of these decisions become like an easy yes or no, and wouldn't be so driven by money, which seems to be like the thing that we keep coming back to. Is like, it is money at the end of the day. And it angers me so much because I want women to be in the sport, and I want people to feel like they belong.
Exactly.
It's so wild because I was talking to, I tell my friends this all the time, especially seeing where the world is going lately. It's a little scary out there, but they want to go all over the world to chase Formula One and to go to all the races and all that kind of stuff. But I'm genuinely like, yeah, but some of these places like don't have someone that looks like me, and even in the fans and in the crowd. And I like don't feel particularly safe, and I feel like if the sport itself was more values driven and, like you said, it was pushing on these actual issues and trying to be better, then we would see the fan demographic shift a little bit to actually represent what the world looks like actually at the races. And then someone like myself would feel a bit more comfortable. Like, I don't know what that is. I don't know how to get there though either, because what's his name? Like the Bernie, right?
Bernie Ecclestone.
Literally worst human ever. Like, I don't know.
Oh no, that would be Max Mosley if you ask me, but they're on the same path.
Every time I see any
no, but that is literally it.
Every time I see a photo of Bernie, I'm like, you look like a Disney villain. I don't know.
He is one. How is it that the leader of the literal, was he like president of the FIA, Max Mosley?
Yeah, he was.
2009, that man left. He was literally the son of an actual fascist. Like, I am not the first one to hesitate calling someone a fascist, but Oswald Mosley was an actual fascist. Like, the man was in cahoots with Hitler, like actual Hitler. And we just go, yeah, he's fine. He did a lot for driver safety there, guys. It's fine.
Okay, wait. I did not know this. You need to back this story up.
Okay, so
What?
Max Mosley,
Okay. Yeah.
head of the FIA or something to 2009. He was the son of Oswald Mosley, who was the leader of the British Union of Fascists, who was like friends with Hitler, like led multiple fascist surges. Have you watched Peaky Blinders?
Okay, so I have tried to watch Peaky Blinders numerous times, and if you're telling me that I should try again, I will try again.
Okay, so I don't. This you won't get this reference, but anyone else who might be like probably North American who doesn't get it, the guy in the final season with the slick back hair, that's Oswald Mosley, guys. The fascist guy, that's Oswald Mosley. And now Max was involved in early fascist clashes, several riots in London. I think the Brixton riots, which were race-based riots in the 60s. He was involved in instigating some of those as like an older teenager, someone around my age. He then stepped back into it. Like he doesn't embrace it, never liked to talk about it as much, but he was the son of Oswald Mosley. And when he died, like what was it last year? Like I don't want to disrespect the dead, but pretty much every F1 media guy was like, there's a whole load of rumors, you can look them up. I'm not going to address them, but they're widely accepted as true in the UK. But like everyone was like, News of the World led a smear campaign against him. He did so much for driver safety. I'm
What?
like, guys, his dad was a fascist.
I had no idea. Like,
This is how deeply run it is because these were well-respected F1 journalists saying we need to look at both sides because he might have been the son of a fascist,
oh my God,
but
you can't
he
both
did do a lot for driver safety.
you can't both sides if someone's a fascist. What do you mean?
And then it's like, oh, but he was never a fascist himself. He just was involved in the like race riots in the 1960s.
Oh my God. What the hell?
Yeah, it's that Wikipedia page is an interesting one if anyone wants to go for it.
That is like so utterly chaotic. And to say that this person, oh my God, had so many
Was
times.
FIA president or
Like,
something for like 2009, like in my lifetime.
oh my God. And then we're wondering, and
This
like
is how deeply run it is.
exactly, we're wondering, like, why is this sport like this? Why hasn't there been this like huge watershed moment? Why? And it's like, oh, because of people like this who, oh my God.
Who
Okay.
are normalized. Did you put the thing about Jean Toe in the Notion? I think I saw
No.
it in there. About his comment when Lewis said maybe it's because I'm black.
Oh, yeah, I did. I
Yeah,
did.
like it's stuff like that as well. Like Jean Toe has called his wife racial slurs. I'm pretty sure. Like I'm 99.9% sure that's been said. Because
Jesus.
she's like the mother or the one of the older women on Crazy Rich Asians. Like she's a really famous actress,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like been recorded as calling her racial slurs or whatever. Like I don't know why people can even pretend that our sport is not misogynistic. Like we've been talking about it for the
Yeah.
last like however long, so it's obvious to us, but to other people they genuinely refuse to see it, and that's just wild to me because these are the people at the top. It's those lot and it's billionaires.
And so for I've talked about this a bit on the podcast, but y'all know I ran a startup before and now I advise startups and all that kind of stuff. And one of the biggest things is a lot of the issues, regardless of how many employees at the bottom are pushing it forward, if it does not come, if changes like this and the stuff that we're talking about today don't come from the top, like a board and or the company president, nothing happens.
Yeah.
Nothing happens. And I know it's a bit of a rude awakening, but truly nothing happens. So with Amelia shedding light on all the stuff that I had no idea about, it explains so much as to why there's this constant like wall it feels like we're hitting in the sport, and why there just hasn't been as radical change as there should be, judging that we are like in 2022 now, have gone through 2 years of a pandemic where I feel like most people are having like a, I don't believe in, I'm just gonna say like a come to Jesus moment, like where it's like, okay, is this is this how we want to live? Is this how we want to be? Is this how we want to structure our company? Is this what we want to do? And it totally makes sense to me why now it isn't like that with this sport.
because they see this, because you're gonna have people like Seb who have in the last few years, maybe he always believed in this, but he is having the
Yeah.
realization that he has the power to be vocal and he is using that. And everyone knows the influence Seb has, but he doesn't have a greater influence than Lawrence Stroll. Even though a million more people know who he is, he
Yeah.
doesn't have the money. He isn't a billionaire,
No.
and he isn't in a leadership role. And until he is, which I believe he could be and would be brilliant in, the change that he wants isn't going to come. And that's like, I think Seb is the best example of this because he has spent the last year, bless him, fighting with everything in his little body for queer rights. And yet it is announced the start of this year, oh, look, we're signing a deal with Aramco. We're signing a deal with literally Saudi Arabia and we're going to put them all over our car. And that's completely fine. Don't worry about it. This man literally held a race for women in the Middle East in karting who were oppressed by their country. And then Lawrence Stroll goes, okay, but we are gonna take money from their government who are oppressing them. That's fine. Don't worry about it, Seb. Go home to your chickens.
And sorry, I'm laughing because it just is so ridiculous. I
But
feel
that's what we have to do. We just have to laugh.
oh my God. So one of the other topics I wanted to talk to you about, and it's because you've been just so vocal again, is just race in this sport. So for those who don't know, the drivers on the grid this year there's only one black driver and there's one
Mhm.
Chinese driver, right? Guan Yu Zhou.
Yeah, and then we have Yuki and Alex again. God
Yes.
bless.
Yuki. Oh, I forgot that
And
Alex.
Checo.
My
And
brain is
Checo.
melting. So we have Yuki from Japan, and then Alex, who I believe is part Filipino from the Philippines.
Alex is Thai.
Thai, good God, there we go, Thai, and then of course Checo, who we did a whole episode on, who I'm like a stan of, so I love that. And one of the things that's been like very apparent to me, and even in looking at how the teams are built, when they're all celebrating at the end after they finally won or something, there are like no black people in this sport.
There just aren't any. That's just objective fact. Like not in teams, they just aren't.
They're just yeah, there are none. And I just we know Lewis has been the lone black driver, what it feels like, forever, like probably since he was a kid, right? Like
Yeah,
it just forever.
pretty
And Lewis
much.
is like 36, I think now, or like, yeah, somewhere like 35, 36. So pretty much his entire career he's been one of one. What we've talked about this a little bit with the gender side of things, but do you have any specifics on or ideas on what needs to change there so we actually have just general
Yeah,
diversity? Because when it comes to even if you're just talking about the UK and the drivers that are coming up, through the ranks
yeah.
there, how the hell has there only been one black driver for the last 30 plus years, it seems like?
I feel like, oh God, this is obviously one that I don't like. I don't. It's not I don't like talking about it. I just don't feel as informed because it obviously isn't an issue that ever affects me. Like I'm as white as they come,
Yeah.
um, in a white area. But like I feel like from reading the Hamilton Commission, from things like that, I think a lot of this. I don't want to say the same solutions because it's a vastly different issue. There are things that you can do that relate to like the role of women that
Yeah.
you can also apply the same ideas, like just changing the ideology from the top. That's the basic step. I do think there is more of a, like the Hamilton Commission revealed, especially in terms of the teams, a socioeconomic element. Because again, as we say, like most of the teams recruit from the UK, right?
Yeah.
Their active perspective is in the UK. I think racism in the UK is, I don't want to say it's a bigger issue than misogyny, but like it is something I think that is more widely held.
Really? Okay.
I feel like, or maybe that's just from like my own experiences or from what I see. I think obviously there is so much misogyny in the UK, and
Yeah.
women are oppressed by the police maybe in a more visible element, even especially compared to the conversations we see in America. But I do think there is so much racism in the UK, so much.
Ooh.
And I think like from what Lewis talks about as well, from as I said, the Hamilton Commission, there is a socioeconomic element to it
Yeah.
where Black kids especially aren't being pushed into STEM. They aren't being pushed into STEM roles, and they like for a lot of people you can't afford the graduate qualifications that is necessary. Well, isn't necessary, but
Yeah.
is a requirement for jobs in F1, and also like the money for karting. Like Lewis will always say, I wouldn't be able to be successful now in karting because you wouldn't have the money. But I feel like that's a big thing now because, like we were saying with the billionaires, black people are statistically more likely to be in worse socioeconomic conditions. Like white people are
Yeah.
richer on average in the UK, and that affects education and that affects opportunity, especially with like things like graduate roles, things like just having the access into education, and also the way that there are less black teachers for STEM in the UK.
Yeah.
I feel like things like that affect like our diversity in terms of race more than gender.
Yeah. I think
But I don't know.
no, don't say it. I don't know. So I did pull out some stuff from the Hamilton Commission. So for those who don't know, the Hamilton Commission obviously thrown together
It's
by
a
the
gold
wonderful,
mine.
yeah, from the brilliant Lewis Hamilton. I'll make sure to put it in the description of the podcast so you can just click it and go to it. But there was 10 months of research that included interviews, surveys, literature reviews, and more around that, just on the UK's racing industry, schools, colleges, and F1. So they really did a deep dive by approaching it from every angle instead of just looking at Formula One.
Mm-hmm.
They went through the essentially like what I would say is like the whole life cycle of how someone becomes
Yeah.
someone that's in the sport. And some of the findings, I wanted to pull out the ones that kind of stuck out to me was that Formula One in general had a lack of strong HR presence in some of the teams, which we kind of touched on the fact that some people are like,
Yeah.
don't have stats,
Yeah.
or like the support organizations. And when, sorry, something I should note too is with the Hamilton Commission, everything was submitted anonymously. So if you do read the commission, there's like names, but they're not real names, stuff like that. But from this, they learned that teams struggle to report their demographic statistics when asked. And a lot of the time, there's some direct quotes in there where I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but it was a lot of people saying, like, oh, I don't see color. They're like, oh, if they're brilliant,
Yeah.
like we would hire them, not really understanding
And that's
how
the similar issue with the women thing as well.
exactly, right? Like,
People just act like the
understand it.
talent is not there. Like it's not that white men are statistically more likely to be better at science and technology or better racing drivers. And the perception that like it's such a cognitive dissonance that you think, like
Yeah.
obviously we can all understand that white men are not somehow genetically predisposed to be in these roles, and
Yeah.
yet they are so dominant in the leadership. So where does that, I'm gesturing my hands at you, you can't see, but where is that gap between them? How does that not transfer?
I got nothing. Like I truly don't, that they don't see. And again, it comes to like I understand like people submitted to this anonymously and I love that they were so honest, but it's like how do you say things like, well, if they were brilliant, we'll hire them and not hear like what you're saying. You know what I mean? And not
Exactly.
hear what like the exact words and the barriers that exist with that, and the fact that somehow it isn't ringing in your head when you say that oh wait a minute, I haven't seen any
Why?
women or any one that's like literally of any different ethnic background.
Literally.
And
You
why
run good racing teams. You are not this stupid.
exactly. Some other findings is that the Formula One staff typically recruited from a very small pool, so very specific handful of UK universities. Again, talking to what Amelia said, just like very limited opportunities. So if you don't go to one of those universities, it is way less likely you're going to get tapped.
Yeah, and even if we're assuming those universities are, this is from my perspective of someone going through the UK education system, not to like put in, but like,
Yeah,
if we're assuming those universities are the best ones in the UK, that's mainly London, like, and like Oxford, so Oxford and Cambridge. London, like, I'm from a pretty middle class background. I couldn't afford to go to university in London. No one can, unless
no
you're
one
from a
can.
rich background.
Yeah,
And like the Oxford and Cambridge process, that is something that disproportionately is guided towards private school students who are, of course, far richer and therefore more likely to be white, because it is so much more time consuming. That's just like every single thing as part of this is impacted by discrimination and race and inequality.
yeah, yeah. And something that I don't think people recognize is when you are in a position of privilege, whether it's through universities or going to these private schools or whatever that may be in you in your life. I actually had, I don't know if she listens to the podcast, so I won't say her name, but I was taking a friend of mine through like basically a mini workshop tied to like businessy stuff. And she is a Black woman who's going to be starting an organization. And one of the things that she said to me was like, with you going into these spaces that are predominantly a bunch of white men, like you made all these connections and you actually have social capital.
Yeah,
And it never occurred to me in that way that I was like, oh, you're right. Like I have connections to a lot of people that even 4 years ago I didn't know. And
yeah,
um even that little bit, even having that connection is something that a lot of people do not have if you're not in those spaces. And when we look at like the talent pools for universities or, the fact that everyone's like being funneled from private schools to go to the Oxford
yeah,
Cambridges of the world, you're surrounded typically by other people that
exactly.
are the very same as you or have that quote unquote social capital. So if you ever need anything in the future, if you need that reference to get into Formula One, or if you need what is it, like your friend, instead of applying for traditional internships, it's your friend's dad
Yeah,
that runs whatever opportunity you want to chase after. Those may seem like little things for you, but it changes, like it just opens you up to so much more opportunity.
everything.
And it change, like you said, yeah, it changes everything. It
Like,
is
I feel like I
everything.
have that now, but I feel like I have gained quite a lot of social capital because of my online space.
Yeah.
But that's because like I dedicate so much time to it. Like, it sounds stupid because it's just words out, but like it is something you dedicate a lot of time to. But I think if I was a woman of color, I would not get treated in some cases with the same sympathy.
Yeah.
Or I feel like a lot of people perceive me, if I was a woman of color, people wouldn't perceive me as young as they do, which
Yeah.
isn't something like obviously I'm encouraging, but I think like the idea of the white vulnerable woman trope, I feel like that helps me and that gets me social capital. And just like having access to the people I do now, I want to be that for every woman around me. But I feel like you don't, like, that's so hard to gain, and you have to be so lucky.
Yeah, it's so incredibly difficult to gain, and that's something that you put so much work into, right? It's I always am astounded because I find that being on Twitter can be so like soul sucking sometimes.
Oh yeah,
So especially with everything that's been going on in Canada, like for at least the last 22 days, I'm just like I can't look at this stuff. But the thing is, by making those connections and putting yourself out there, you do, if you are aware of your own privilege and things like that, you can like lift up others with you. But that's a lot of, I honestly feel like a lot of responsibility, Amelia, that you have on your shoulders, unknowingly or knowingly, right? Because, you kind of curated the space and cultivated the space. But if you're also like looking out for people that are less privileged than you, like it does end up being a bit of a challenge to like handle everything that comes with it. I find, at least personally in my experience.
mm.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on one thing because I know I see you tweeting about this all the time, and it's something that's been like disgusting for me to see. Tied to race is just Lewis Hamilton's just general treatment
Oh
by
God.
the press to the actual people in Formula One to like I just I everything.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you this because I just don't know if it's like a disconnect between like what we hear about North American culture versus like what's in the UK. But a lot of the sort of headlines that come out um, whenever there's anything to do with Lewis really feeds off of the angry black man trope,
Yeah.
especially like headlines that come out of the UK. And I know that I can't believe I'm bringing Meghan Markle into this, but I'm going to talk about like
No,
Meghan
do. I was literally thinking of that before you even said it.
because as again someone in Canada who there is this like weird affinity for the Queen. I don't know why, it's just a thing here. And the royal family and things like that. When we saw the headlines coming out from these like raggy shitty magazines out of the UK and just the stuff that they were saying, it was just like, what the hell is going on? Why is this
Yeah,
even happening? Do they understand that there's so many like not even like racially coded language, it's just fully racist shit that's being said.
it is.
And then to watch Lewis go through, you know, I hate talking about Abu Dhabi, it like makes me physically ill, but like to see him go through
Everything.
that and then have the grace enough to stand up there and then take his time to like do what he needs to do on his own,
Yeah,
but then to be painted in this like really problematic light, especially through UK media. Like I saw you tweet this.
yeah,
It's so funny because like you're right, there's like TMZ has like good headlines, but then
yeah.
UK media is just like
The
just
UK media.
just shitting on this person, and it's not even just like that, it's just so racist, it's so racist, and then when
Yeah,
you call them out for being racist, everyone gets upset.
it's like the UK media should be like. I mean, someone probably has studied it, but like the way the media in the UK is so racist and so sexist is incredible. Like it's insane. I mean, you can study it with elections, but the Prime Minister literally broke the law and lied on multiple occasions about doing it in the last few months. And there are still newspapers defending that. And it's the same ones. You have, and like the influence they have, the influence
Yeah.
specific newspapers have in the UK. People call it the Daily Mail with the Meghan Markle thing, but it's the Sun as well. Um, I think we're pretty lucky that the Sun's self-run writers aren't always the worst people around, but just the way he's treated,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it informs so much of the UK perspective. Like obviously I haven't been following the sport forever.
Yeah.
I've only followed it in the last few months, and like I knew nothing about motorsport, so I didn't necessarily have an opinion on Lewis. But if I was told to form one, it would probably be a negative one, just because there is just this like attitude towards it. And I think now I've started watching F1 and having conversations, I'm more likely to find Lewis fans, but it's in people that you think are decent people. Like I can be having a conversation with one of my teachers about F1, and like some of them are like, one of them's an F1 fan and likes him, but some of the others are just like calling him a hypocrite. Like, and it's just objectively not true stuff. And you just think like it's insane. Like it isn't on the same level, but do you know, especially a few years ago when everyone would just hate Taylor Swift for no
Yeah.
reason. Like everyone would just perceive her as this bad person, even though she hadn't done anything. And it was just so obviously misogynist, but no one really picked up on it.
Yeah.
Or I certainly didn't. Or like even with Cardi B to an extent, it's the same thing but worse. So many people just perceive him as a bad person. And
Yeah.
it's so obviously racist, but so many people in the sport believe it. And when you have, I feel like especially Abu Dhabi has made it worse, just because, well, like last season has made it worse because before it was just a Lewis versus the Wild thing, but now it's a Lewis. People put it into this frame of Lewis versus Max fans.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a Lewis fan and I'm a biased Lewis fan, and I always call myself that, but I have a very strong belief as someone that does try to be neutral in a lot of respects. But being neutral doesn't mean you have to stay in the middle. If Max Verstappen and the entirety of the Red Bull leadership are very obviously being racist towards Lewis, I'm
Yeah.
not going to sit in the middle and call it being unbiased. There are very senior people in Formula One who are very obviously racist, and a lot of that is transferring towards their attitude towards Lewis. So I'm sick to the teeth of people saying, "Oh, it's a Lewis versus Max fans thing now," because it isn't.
It isn't.
So many people in this country, which is where a lot of this sport is based, and this wider sport and this wider world, want to see that man fail, and they are infuriated because he never does. He so rarely falls.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not even at the position that some people are, that Abu Dhabi was like premeditated far in advance, but just this man does not fall,
Yeah.
and people rejoice when he like stumbles, and it's so sickening.
And I'm glad that you touched on Red Bull, and we have some interesting opinions over here on our podcast about Christian Horner. But for people that have watched last season, there were not once or twice, there was several times where Christian Horner made comments that fed the angry black man trope.
Yeah,
that 100% did
so
it
many times,
so many times. And then when
and he did it knowingly.
sorry, what?
He did it knowingly.
That's exactly it.
Like, especially after the first time, he must have known. He's not
Exactly.
a stupid man.
Like, you are not that's exactly it. You're not a stupid man. You have the funds to have quite a large PR team. So how is this even happening is
Yeah.
a giant question mark. And it isn't ignorance. Like, this is intentional.
Yeah.
And then what pissed me off through that whole situation is it didn't happen just once. It happened multiple times. And then I think there was twice where he like kind of tried to walk it back, but there wasn't a direct acknowledgement of the damage that was done. Because
Yeah.
with Christian Horner saying the things that he was saying, and yes, it was directed to Lewis, but the thing is, if they have any black person that's working on
Yeah.
their team, you
Which
are
they do.
exactly, you're feeding that trope, and it's directed, it's
Exactly.
like directed to someone that is in your team. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
It's been so frustrating to me, where, oh my gosh, like, to be on Instagram, which I feel like social media can be a great place, but it's also like can be just so irritating and horrendous. To be on like Lewis's page after, I think that like very, was it Silverstone where the big accident
Yeah.
happened?
Yeah.
Like, I understand being upset, be upset, but to be on his Instagram and reporting over and over again, people posting like gorilla or like monkey related
It's
things,
actually sickening.
I was just like, how is this allowed? Like, be upset. That is fine.
Yeah.
To take it to this level was absolutely insane. And I remember, so Caitlin, you know, I feel like is finding her voice in all of this lately, which has been so great for me. But she even was like, I am just astounded that that's what's happening. And she's like, I went on the account and I just reported every single thing I could, because I was like, how is this even allowed? Like, how? And then, you know, 4 days later, Formula One's like, oh yeah, like we, you know, racist comments are bad. And it's like, what? You have read something amongst your fans where they think this sort of behavior is completely normal. And it's because the people at the top,
It's because it's normalized.
Are doing it and are
Yeah.
knowingly doing it, are intentionally doing it. And I'm sorry, I'm getting so impassioned because I just,
No, it's fine.
it feels like you're almost in a like, I don't even know. It feels like it feels like you're watching something just like a train crash, but like no one is believing you. You know what I mean? You're like, no, it happened. This is wrong. And everyone else is like, oh, it's fine. It's because like, it's just a Max thing. Like, they're just upset about Max. And I'm like, what?
How far do we have to go until people recognize that you cannot separate the things Red Bull have said from the racist views that they so clearly now hold? Like, I have faith in so many people at Red Bull, and I think there are so many people in that team, and so many fans of that team that are genuinely such incredible people and truly are with us for the fight for change. But like, I try to separate being a Lewis fan from this, but I don't think we should have to.
No.
Like, it is so clear now that every single person, like, there are so many people at the top of that team who are okay with this narrative. Like, there's like the head of we have a Formula One like all-party parliamentary committee or something in the UK, and the head of that said what Christian said at Silverstone incensed these racist things, whether he said it on purpose or not. And it like you were saying with just the racist debates, it reminds me of the Euros in the UK,
Yeah.
where three of the people that took a penalty in the final against Italy were black men, and they were young black men. And a lot of people were angry at the choice of them because they were so young. Like some of them were teenagers.
Yeah.
And how literally the second they missed that penalty, every single person in the UK knew they were going to face racist abuse. Like it wasn't even, oh no, it was the second that penalty was missed. Every single person knew what was going to happen, and it did. And it was like clockwork. And I feel like this Lewis versus Max narrative, it's being pushed as if it's a narrative against the drivers. And it's so obviously about Lewis versus so many other people.
Yeah.
And I feel like those two things are becoming intertwined. I'm like, I don't want to hate Max. I really truly want to believe that Max is a great person and that, but every single time there's something happens when his team choose to take it as an opportunity to make up obvious lies about Lewis, to say, oh, he knew Max was in the hospital and he celebrated the win or whatever.
Oh my God.
It's so infuriating because it means that I want to have hope in Formula One, and I want to have hope in Max because I see him as the future in terms of racing. But every single time he does that, I lose hope in him, and I lose hope in the future of our sport to make change.
And that's what concerns me too, because if Lewis has been in the sport now for 36 years, has been working his ass off to and this is what makes me so sad about like the angry black man trope, is because he can't just be like, he can't be upset.
Yeah.
Because if he is, they're going to paint him in a horrible light. He can't celebrate because if he does, they paint him in a terrible light. And he has like put this Hamilton commission, has mission 44, has done all this work. My worry is when he leaves the sport and there's not like a physical representation of, frankly, like this person that has lived through just incredible amounts of racism that's come from other teams, that has come from the fans, that has come from like everyone. Like, will we ever have another black driver in the sport? Like that becomes
like there is no one. Like obviously there are black kids now in like junior series, but there isn't, like if you look at the Oscar Piastris, the Callum Ilots, there are a lot of young drivers that we see fitting into the next roles in the sport. We can actively discuss who we think is going to fit into these roles in the next few years. Like we can even talk about it with women, because we can talk about Jamie Chadwick. We can talk about people like that. There is no black driver we're having that discussion about. And like I don't want to make Lewis feel like he has a responsibility, because he doesn't.
Yeah, he
we
doesn't.
owe things to him. He doesn't need to spend another second in this sport.
No, and I think that's something that people forget, is that these people don't owe us anything. Like they get into the sport, they're the ones that are risking their lives. They don't owe us anything. And I think that the one thing that we hope is that these people will become leaders and will try to transform the spaces that they're in. And I kind of share the same hope with you, tied to Max, because there are moments where I am critical of the Mercedes team and how they've approached certain things, or when Toto gets upset and kind of flies off the handle a little bit, I'm like, hey, maybe let's not do that. But it's so hard.
Let's take a breath.
Yeah, exactly. Let's not go straight to a reporter. Thoughts. But it's so hard to even think of the sport critically, especially in those moments, because someone says something that's racist, like, and then you're like, no, this, like you said, you can't just be like, you can't sit in the middle on that. You have to call it out for what it is. And I'm really hoping that Max, and I have more faith in Max than I have Christian Horner, but I hope it gets to the space where he can say, like, both things can be true at the same time. You know what I mean? Like, I could have been upset about something, but that comment that was said could be racist and is racist. And I'm going to call it out and tell my fans that they shouldn't do that. I don't know if we're going to get there though. Like, I love that you have some faith.
It feels like a Mercedes engine thing as well. It's going to be it's such a niche thing, but it feels like something that only Mercedes engine teams do. And that, as a Mercedes fan, like I'm obviously going to favor, like, I call myself a McLaren fan, I'll call myself an Aston fan, I'll call myself a Mercedes fan, but like it is literally the Ferrari and Red Bull engine teams that are rubbish at it. And for as long as that continues, teams like Ferrari and Red Bull aren't going to care.
They're not going to care. And it needs to change, because if I was like, I'm looking at this sport and I feel nervous to go to certain countries to watch the race. If I was a young Black kid who's thinking about entering the sport, and you're seeing how Lewis has been treated after 36 years, after winning as many times as he's won, after being graceful when he was told to be grace, you know what I mean? After being like
Yeah,
the model person, the model role model, I would not want to do it. You know what I mean?
exactly.
So I don't know when that, like, I just don't know when it changes, because it, like you said, it's like the team's serious issues. There's issues with the media, which has been called out, tied to Lewis, but then also called out, tied to Meghan Markle. And there hasn't been any changes or any sort of acknowledgement of how racist this coverage is, or how racist it is. And I don't know what needs to change. Like, I feel like at a complete loss, because I truly felt like when I was seeing those fucking comments on Lewis Hamilton's photo, I just felt so sick. Like, I really felt like, how have we gone this far backwards? But then it was also a
Yeah,
rude awakening of, maybe we were never going backwards. Maybe this is what it
yeah.
always was like. You know what I mean? Like, maybe this is what it was always like. And
This is who we are
yeah,
as a sport.
100%. That's what it is. It's there right then and there. And that can't be okay if we want diversity in the sport, for when it comes to gender, when it comes to race, when it comes to orientation, whatever it may be. We cannot have it be like that the most sort of prolific person in the sport is not even protected or shielded, or is dealing with just
Yeah,
like the most atrocious shit. And have I just don't know how he thinks, like, when it comes to especially just the senior leadership at these teams. I'm like, how do you not
it's
know
such a
what you're
catch 22.
yeah.
It's such a catch 22 because, like we were saying at the beginning of the episode, like everything feels like it could be a watershed moment, but we don't have the backing to make it one.
Yeah.
So many things have happened now where they could cause real change. They could lead to real things happening, because as much as we don't have a huge plan for the solutions, but we know specific changes that can be put into place. Like, I've always believed, for example, in a code of conduct
Yeah.
for drivers, for staff, for in place in F1, but also in F2 and F3, for things that we see those drivers do. And yet, because no one actually at the top backs it, or not enough people at the top back it, we're never going to get those things. And so these things happen and we don't get any change from them. And because we're not getting the change from them, we're not getting this massive change in attitudes.
It's so it just harms the sport as a whole. And I think what you've done so well is like curate a space on Twitter to have these really like difficult conversations and draw attention to them. And I know I mentioned it a ton over the podcast, but just because I'm so impressed with you, and I'm curious, like, kind of letting Formula One sort of go, just to talk about the career I feel like you've built over the last little bit.
That's a big word.
I know it sounds like a big word, but I truly do, like, I don't know, your life is your life, obviously, but I feel like you built something really good, and you're
Yeah.
challenging a lot. And I think that's a lot to do. So when we're looking at F1 Twitter, how have your experiences been so far in sort
Oh
of
God. That's a long list.
I mean, I'm curious, because so when I first like bopped onto F1 Twitter, I was like, oh, it's so nice to, meet people, and meet people that like the sport, especially here in Canada, because it feels like it's very
Yeah.
distant from one another, you know what I mean? But then I started seeing some things and I'm like, oh, I don't want to
Yeah, you
I don't
don't
want
want to be
to
here. Go away.
I'm
Keep
like, I don't
yourself
want to
safe.
do this. So for someone that's like done as much as work as you have in this space, I just genuinely want to know. And I know that you kind of gave it like this interesting reaction, but maybe a better thing is, if you could sum it up into like one word, what would it be?
Roller coaster.
There we go.
Maybe. Because sometimes it's great, because there are some incredibly genuine people on this app. Like, I've made some incredible friends. I know everyone says that, but like,
Yeah.
there are incredible people, and there are people that I get to talk to that I think, oh my God, this is such an incredible opportunity. And everything I get to do, everything like this that I get to do feels like such a privilege.
Yeah.
But then, like, sometimes it happens and sometimes I don't even help it because I have this reaction because I feel like I'm just constantly like on edge in this space. But I do feel like to an extent, it's like people want to target you.
Yeah.
And I feel like, especially when I see, I'm not going to name names, but I see people who are very much employed in our sport are at the very top echelons of it, talking about the abuse they face. And I think, you wouldn't last a day in my shoes. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to invalidate any of it, but
Yeah.
I think the things that's said to me is so disproportionate to the space that I occupy because it isn't that big. Like, there are so many stands, people that don't want to work in F1. Like, I love them, some of them are my best friends.
Yeah.
But people that don't even occupy the same space, that don't get anywhere near what I get. And sometimes it can be so permanently negative that you think, is this worth it? And I will always answer yes at the end of that, but it is sometimes something I think about.
Yeah, and I think that's something that it's so challenging with social, and I do think there's like a giant difference from being on Instagram and putting yourself out there versus being on Twitter and really trying to push really
Yeah.
difficult conversations, right? Like you're not sitting by and letting it slide. And when you're having these difficult conversations in such a public way, like how have you handled it when it's gotten sometimes like when there's the good where it's like, oh yeah, this worked out, but also when it's like not been so great?
I mean, when it's good, it's easier to deal with because it feels so awesome. Like, even when it's not F1, like, there have been things like, for example, there was something related to the UK education system, and I've been
Yeah.
talking about that for months. And then finally, people from like, obviously not F1, but in general, took attention to it, and it got a lot of engagement. And then I've had an opportunity to talk about it on a bigger platform, and I really appreciate that. So that can feel amazing because it's like, this could create change. This could push a little bit towards what I want. But when it's negative, it's like, it's so difficult.
Yeah.
My first reaction always now is just to like go on private because
Yeah.
I feel like that's like a comfort blanket in a way because you control what people see more. Just taking time out, like I've been saying I was going to do that now. I'm not as much, but like just making sure you don't engage permanently. Like maybe steps you shouldn't be taking, but like I shouldn't have to take.
Yeah.
But like just stepping away from it, trying to reevaluate and remember why I love Formula One because I do, and I wouldn't be here if I didn't.
Yeah.
Like maybe watching old races, trying to like maybe now it's like studying the 2022 cars, things like that. Writing something sometimes. It can be really difficult when people like attack you or when there's like, because sometimes it can be like, there have been times where I've said really stupid things and it's been valid,
Yeah.
but sometimes you know it isn't. So then it's like it can be really scary. But
Yeah.
just putting it into perspective, things like that, talking to people that are like more successful than me and listening to their advice, which is sometimes so useful, is really nice. I feel like that's something that really helps.
Oh my goodness. I think no, I just I feel for you because I think it's just it's so difficult because when it's good, it's really good, right? Like I've met some of
Yeah,
my
it's
closest friends,
incredible.
but when it's bad, it's like holy shit, this is
Yeah,
this is really bad. And for people that if you do have like a bit more of your personal information out there, like that's something that always starts to worry me is if
yeah,
I have like a really negative encounter, it's like okay, you know, that could be fine, but I actually have a lot of my personal information just on the web because of my
yeah,
like startup and stuff like that. So then I start to get nervous because I'm like, I don't want to be harmed. And I think we've
yeah,
seen very publicly, I don't know. I always say, like, did the pandemic break people's brains? Like, I don't know if it did or if it was just like just general misinformation from Facebook. Like, I don't know.
yeah,
But we've seen like very publicly here in Canada, at least, like where people like do not give a shit. Like they'll see someone post something on Instagram about a business, you know, and then we'll go to that business and assault the owner or something like that. That's
yeah,
something that we've seen here at least, and it's becoming more and more prevalent with everything that's just been going on over the last 2+ years. So I understand being scared and like using the switching your account to private as like taking that time to just ground yourself, because it's also
Yeah.
just really shit when people are like piling on and you're like, I need a freaking minute to like
Yeah,
breathe here, people.
exactly.
So looking at, everything that you've done on F1 Twitter, you're insanely young. You have this amazing whatever you choose to do next and over again. Like I don't know. I have had multiple careers in my day already. So I'm a big believer in like, hey, do whatever you want as long as it interests you. Um, where do you see like what's next for you? Tied to F1 Twitter, tied to Formula One, like what do you want to do? What's coming up next? Tell me.
Oh, so next for me, like life-wise, is university. I think trying to get like something I'm trying to meld is like writing, like because before I found the only thing I cared about, well, the thing I cared about most was politics. So I feel like I found a space now where I can mix the two. So pursuing that in terms of writing more, but then in terms of like F1, I don't want to, I don't want to ruin anything. But there's some people now that are like some platforms that are bigger in the community that I think is an obvious next step for me that
Yeah.
I'm gonna like be working with more now. Like I feel like platforms that I feel like I really it makes sense for me to write on.
Yeah.
People that I'm really excited to like just use, put my stuff on, talk to more people, get more connections, do more stuff. Like even like talking to people, growing and finding a better space on Twitter,
Yeah.
talking to people like you, just making sure that everything I'm doing is working towards this goal and it's
Yeah.
being productive. That's what I think is my next steps now I've established a space.
I'm so excited for you. I love, no, I truly do. Cause I don't know. If I had like a little bit of you when I was like your age,
No,
I feel like not to say that I can't change the world now, just because I'm 28, I can still do it. I'm still doing a lot of stuff, but I think it would have, shifted things a little bit quicker. Um, yeah, I think whatever you put your mind to, you're gonna do, like truly. And just
thank you.
yeah, like I said, I'm very astonished and impressed with you. So we have like a bit of rapid fire questions that we typically ask our guests. And
Go for it.
what was I gonna say? They can also be like rapid fire with an asterisk, because I find that whenever someone asks me rapid fire questions, I start to get like stressed out and I'm like, wait a minute, what if that's not true? So you can elaborate as much as you want,
I'm
but
gonna try and asterisk as little as possible, but go.
who is your favorite driver? I think I have an idea, but
Lewis Hamilton.
yeah, not surprising. Which team is your favorite team?
Oh, Mercedes. I always say Mercedes by default because I was a George fan and I was a Lewis fan, and then now I'm obviously a Mercedes fan. But Mercedes.
With the 2022 season like right around the corner, what race are you looking forward to most?
Oh God. Silverstone and Brazil. I'm gonna say both. Or Florida. Oh, now I'm giving like three answers. Silverstone and Brazil are my favorite tracks, and like as a Lewis fan, I think they're the best tracks as well. I think Silverstone has an energy as a Lewis fan, so I'm gonna say Silverstone, but Miami will be cool.
Okay, yeah, I'm kind of with Miami there. Who do you think will win the constructors this year?
Oh God. Oh, testing's 48 hours away. Um, I'll give you a better answer to you next week. Oh God, I still want to say Mercedes.
Okay,
That car looks rapid.
that's so funny that you say that, because I'm like, with all the cars being new, I feel like this is a very impossible question to ask people nowadays, because we don't
It's so scary.
we don't know anything. Even the teams don't know anything. All week when they've been unveiling cars, they've been like, yeah, but this everything will be
Have you
different.
seen the Alpine?
I haven't
They
seen
just launched it.
one. They
They
just
literally just launched it like 20 minutes ago. I don't like it.
gonna have to look at that later.
They have a they have like a normal livery, which I don't like as much, and then they have a show livery, which is basically just the BWT pink. And I like the show livery, but
Sorry, as I like look this up. Oh wow. I
it's like you
really
had pink and blue and you did that.
I really want I just was, as soon as BWC was like, we're leaving, I was like, no. What about me and my
It's
desire
like,
for a pink car? Like, what is wrong with you folks?
exactly. Love pink car.
Oh, that's what they did, huh?
That was my reaction.
It looks so much like Racing Point.
The mostly pink one isn't as bad. It's just the pink and blue. Like, could you not got a bit more creative? A lot of people like it, but
I guess like we might be an anomaly here. Sorry. And the last question is, who you think will be world champ this year?
oh god, because I think the cities will be constructors champions. That might backfire on me. I want to say Lewis just because I think he's like, I feel like George has experienced to do it this year.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, this is me being weird and superstitious, and I'm usually not. But like every time I look at my phone battery percentage, and it's literally happening like twice a week at this point, it says 63%, and it's happening enough that I'm taking it as like some kind of supernatural sign. But now it's stopped, and it keeps doing it at 44, and I think it's just because like I'm looking at it too much now, and I'm noticing it, but it's like freaking me out. But I'm not complaining because George World Champion is fine by me.
Look at that. I mean, I do you think a question that isn't on this list, but if Lewis were to win this year, do you think he'll retire?
Oh, maybe give it one more.
Give it one
I feel
more.
like if he's gonna retire, if he wins, he's more likely to retire. Yeah, but he is like still young compared to Alonso. So
I know people. I know that everyone gets into Formula One like really young, but guess what? They can drive for like a really long time because of that. So
exactly.
where can people find you if they want to follow you, want to read some of the things that you've written?
They can follow me on Twitter, which is at Formula Media. My Instagram is the same, although I'm not nearly as active on that because Instagram is confusing and stresses me out. My website link is on my Twitter, and so is my LinkedIn, which again I don't use as much because that's like scary professional people. Formula Media, formulamedia.com is where I write. But there also should be some stuff coming soon about more places where I write. I do write quite a bit on F1 Chronicle at the moment.
Yeah. So everyone, I was gonna say I was like, we don't have an audience, but I just wanted to thank you so much for coming on. For those who don't know, she obviously is in the UK. I'm in Canada, so we're somehow I booked this at a normal time. I have screwed this up
This is
millions.
magical.
I truly turns out on Google Calendar you can add different time zones so you know when you're booking something. And I was like, oh, okay. This would have been nice to have way earlier during the pandemic, but that's okay. It's fine. We can work with it now. Yeah, folks, that's it for today's episode. Stay checkered, friends, and we'll see you next week. I think the girls will be back. Oh, right. I'm supposed to plug the socials. Go follow us on TikTok, which we update more consistently than anything else. So it's TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter, all at Get Checkered. And we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone. This episode of Get Checkered is brought to you by Pod Power. With Pod Power, our sponsors make it possible for us to amplify voices of Albertans and Alberta podcasters. This episode, Edmonton Community Foundation is giving us a chance to shout out a Pod Power podcast. And we wanted to highlight again Bookwoman, just because Bookwoman is so great. Bookwoman is a podcast about editing, publishing, and writing Indigenous stories. 3 Métis librarians representing nations from across the homeland aim to inspire Indigenous peoples to learn their stories in whatever form that they enjoy. Guests include Indigenous storytellers from diverse mediums like podcasting, burlesque, books, comics, social media, films, music, and so much more in between. You can listen and find out more at bookwomanpodcast.ca. This episode is brought to you by Park Power, your friendly local utilities provider in Alberta, offering internet, electricity, and natural gas with low rates, awesome service, and profit sharing with local charities. Winter is coming, and energy usage for all Albertans will be increasing. So now is a great time for listeners to look at their utility bills and ensure that they are on the best plan. Albertans have a choice who they pay their utility bills to. Park Power is happy to provide free, no obligations comparisons. If you decide to switch providers, it's easy. And you can feel good knowing you're supporting a local business and helping to give back to our communities with your utilities bills. Learn more at parkpower.ca.